Alright, so unbeknownst to me, there are still people who erroneously attribute the 2008 financial and housing crash with free market capitalism. Alright, it's not actually that shocking to me, but I do know that those people are still around, but the reason why I bring this up is because of this video, why it's cool to talk about Marxism again. I'm not going to actually play the video, but I do suggest going and watching it. I was watching this, and it's an interview with Richard Wolff, who I have talked about before. He's one of the leading Marxist thinkers in the US today, and he's kind of a big deal. But at one point in the video, Richard Wolff says that socialism is far more acceptable today in the US, and the reason for this is that everyone saw the failure of capitalism when the 2008 crash occurred, and then he just kind of moves on. No mention of the Federal Reserve, no mention of the Community Reinvestment Act, which I admit, by the way, was only partially responsible, as not every lending institution was affected by the Community Reinvestment Act, but it certainly had a hand in it. He made no mention of Barney Frank pushing banks to give out bad loans, doesn't mention Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, etc., etc. The Federal Reserve, by the way, in contrast to the Community Reinvestment Act, was ubiquitous and omnipresent in severely warping and manipulating economic indicators that the free market would have never done on its own. The only reason why this all occurred was directly attributed to intervention by the government and intervention by government creations. Now, I commented on this video, and I'm not going to read through everything, that would be kind of boring, but you can certainly go watch the video, as I said, and read through these comments if you wish, but I will say this. I mentioned the fact that Richard Wolff made this comment about capitalism being responsible for the 2008 crash, and I pointed out some of the things that are completely antithetical to capitalism that clearly played an insurmountable role in the downturn, and I pointed out that Richard Wolff completely omits this. Now, as I said, I'm not going to read the comments, but I will address a few things. One person said that given time constraints, Richard Wolff wasn't going to get into all those specifics. Okay, fair enough, except for the fact that I have watched countless videos of Richard Wolff with him speaking on this subject, and he does the same thing over and over again in those videos too. He just says it was capitalism's fault, and then he moves on. He has had countless videos and countless opportunities where he could speak about the Federal Reserve and the Community Reinvestment Act and all the things I mentioned before, and he could speak about how those things did not play a role. I have not heard him do this once. He has never even attempted to, from what I have seen. And furthermore, more comments came in about how, okay, if the state did it, it still is somehow capitalism's fault. Okay, that's an odd one to me, and I went back and forth with a few people, and it got to the point where I needed to just go to the dictionary definition of capitalism, in which it states in no uncertain terms that capitalism refers to trade and industry being handled by private interests rather than by the state or the government. The comments made by Richard Wolff, and by who I am assuming are his fans, prove they do not understand free market capitalism in any sense. When you point out government interference, they will still blame capitalism. A stone sinks when you throw it into water. Thinking that the 2008 crash was the result of free market capitalism is like thinking someone holding a stone directly under the surface of water is that stone floating in water. That would be completely ignoring the person exerting force and applying pressure to keep the stone from doing what it naturally would otherwise do. In the exact same way, these Marxists, or whatever they describe themselves as, completely fail in recognizing the wild pressures and distortions that governments place on the market. And if they do say, well, a state has a tendency to grow under capitalism, and therefore the collusion that results will cause these problems, okay, fine. But unbeknownst to them, they just made a fantastic argument in favor of free markets. They might not realize it, but every time they say things like that, they are making a great case as to how a true free market would operate far better than any government involvement in economic affairs. One other thing that I could not help but notice is not one comment made in response to me mentioned anything specific that I brought up in my original post. With the exception of trying to tie government actions with capitalism, they did not give me any meat to work with whatsoever. Now, as I said, one thing that was brought up a few times is that the Federal Reserve is a function of capitalism. Now, I've already described why that's not the case within any reasonable thought on the subject, but what is very interesting about that is that all of these people need to reread the Communist Manifesto. In the 10 planks of what needs to occur to realize the communist dream, written by Karl Marx himself, number 5 on the list is, quote, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. So it is very weird to me that a Marxist would blame the Federal Reserve for being a function of capitalism when the complete opposite is true. An organization almost exactly like the Federal Reserve is directly called for by Marx himself. And why is that? It is to destroy the private sector, which is what capitalism is all about. So the very thing that Marx advocates for in order to take control away from private actors and to diminish private financing and to strike a death blow to capitalism is the very thing that Richard Wolff fans seem to think is a cornerstone of capitalism. The incoherence is overwhelming, but I will leave it at that. Please like and subscribe, and have a good one.